Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Get ready for an unforgettable journey filled with twists, emotions, and life-changing moments. This story is about love, resilience, and the power of second chances, an epic tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last moment. If you're excited to dive into this story and follow along with the journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our future adventures. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Seattle was cloaked in a gray haze as the cold afternoon dragged on. Winter had a way of making the city feel both alive and forlorn, a place where people hustled to escape the chill, their breaths visible in the biting air. Among the throng of hurried strangers, Logan sat slumped against a stone wall on Pike Street, a man invisible to the world. His threadbare jacket, tattered beyond repair, barely shielded him from the wind that cut like knives. The once vivid glimmer in his green eyes had faded, dulled by years of hardship and rejection. Logan was no stranger to hunger. It had been his constant companion for days now. He adjusted his position against the wall, knees pulled tightly to his chest, and tried to focus on the sounds around him. The murmur of footsteps, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby cafe. His pride had kept him from outright begging, but even pride couldn't fill an empty stomach. As he gazed at the ground, resigned to the unchanging monotony of his day, he noticed a pair of sneakers stop in front of him. The shoes were worn, but clean, their faded fabric suggesting someone who took care of what little they had. Logan slowly lifted his head, his curiosity piqued. "Are you hungry?" The voice was soft, hesitant, yet undeniably kind. It belonged to a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her face held an expression that Logan hadn't seen directed at him in years, genuine concern. He hesitated, unsure if she was serious or mocking him. "What?" he asked gruffly, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I asked if you're hungry," she repeated, kneeling down to meet his eye level. She held out a brown paper bag, its contents emitting a savory aroma that immediately made Logan's stomach tighten with longing. Logan studied her face, searching for any sign of pity or condescension, but found none. Her eyes were warm and earnest, her smile unassuming. It had been so long since anyone looked at him like he mattered. Slowly, he reached out and took the bag, the tips of his fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "My name's Grace," she said simply. He nodded, still too stunned to speak. Grace's presence felt almost surreal, like a ray of sunlight piercing through the gloom that had enveloped his life. Before Logan could open the bag or say more, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the fragile moment. "Grace, what are you doing? We're late." Logan turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her tailored coat and expensive boots signaling wealth and authority. Her expression was icy, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Grace began, but the woman cut her off. "Leave it. Let's go." Grace hesitated, her gaze flickering between Logan and the woman. "I'm sorry," she whispered, genuine regret in her voice. She stood and handed Logan the bag before hurrying to the waiting car. Logan watched as she climbed into the sleek black vehicle, which sped off moments later, leaving him alone once more. Yet, for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely abandoned. Grace's simple act of kindness had sparked something in him, a faint glimmer of hope. Unbeknownst to Logan, and even to Grace herself, that brief encounter on Pike Street would set in motion a series of events that would change both their lives forever. As Logan unwrapped the sandwich inside the bag, savoring the first bite, he couldn't help but wonder about the stranger who had stopped to see him. Not as a homeless man, but as a human being. He had no idea that the woman who had yelled at Grace recognized him, or that his life was about to take a dramatic turn. For now, all he could do was eat and wait, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The black car sliced through Seattle's crowded streets, its sleek exterior a reflection of the icy authority of the woman seated inside. Olivia Harrington, Grace's stepmother, sat rigid in the back seat, her sharp features betraying a simmering irritation. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped rhythmically against the leather armrest as she glanced at Grace, who sat quietly beside her. "What were you thinking?" Olivia snapped, her voice low, yet brimming with disapproval. Grace turned to look at her, guilt flickering in her hazel eyes. He looked like he needed help, Olivia. I couldn't just walk past him. Olivia's lips curled into a smirk devoid of warmth. And what did you hope to accomplish by giving him a sandwich? Save the world, one beggar at a time? Grace clenched her fists in her lap, fighting the urge to respond. She had long since learned that arguing with Olivia was a losing battle. The woman always had the upper hand, wielding her wealth and influence like a weapon. Next time, Olivia continued, her tone dripping with condescension, remember your place. You're a Harrington. We don't associate with people like him. Grace looked out the window, her chest tightening with a mix of frustration and sadness. She had always felt out of place in the opulent world of the Harringtons, a family that valued power and appearances above all else. Her father, Robert, had married Olivia after the death of Grace's mother, a decision that had transformed their lives, and not for the better. As the car pulled into the gated driveway of the Harrington estate, Grace couldn't shake the memory of the man on Pike Street. His eyes, weary yet full of an unspoken story, lingered in her mind. She hadn't even asked his name. Meanwhile, back on Pike Street, Logan finished the last bite of the sandwich Grace had given him. The warmth of the meal had momentarily chased away the chill in his bones, but his thoughts were far from settled. He couldn't forget the way Olivia had looked at him, like he was less than nothing. It wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed by someone from her world, but something about her reaction struck a chord of unease in him. Her sharp gaze, the way she froze upon seeing him, felt oddly familiar. Logan leaned back against the wall, his mind drifting to a time when his life had been drastically different. Once, he had been Nathaniel Harrington, the sole heir to one of the wealthiest families in the country. But that life had been ripped away from him after a mysterious tragedy, one he barely survived. For years, he had been presumed dead, erased from the world he once ruled. And now, against all odds, someone from that world had recognized him. Inside the Harrington estate, Olivia paced her lavishly decorated office, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Her mind raced, replaying the moment she had seen Logan, or rather, Nathaniel. She had spent years ensuring that no trace of him remained, orchestrating his disappearance with meticulous precision. His reappearance was a threat she couldn't afford. She poured herself a glass of wine, her hand trembling slightly. This cannot be happening, she muttered to herself. Her thoughts turned to Grace, the one person who could unwittingly unravel her carefully constructed empire. Grace had always been a thorn in Olivia's side, too kind, too idealistic, too willing to defy the Harrington way. An idea began to form in Olivia's mind, one that would serve two purposes: eliminate the threat of Nathaniel's return and teach Grace a lesson about obedience. A cold smile spread across her face as she picked up her phone and dialed a number. "We need to meet," she said curtly. "There's a situation that requires immediate attention." Later that evening, Grace sat in her bedroom, the warmth of the fireplace doing little to chase away the chill she felt inside. She replayed the events of the day, wondering about the man she had helped. What was his story? How had he ended up on the streets? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Olivia entered without waiting for an invitation, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Olivia said, her voice unusually calm. Grace straightened in her chair, bracing herself. "What is it?" Olivia walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. "That man you helped today," she began, her tone deceptively casual. "Do you know who he is?" Grace frowned. "No, He's Nathaniel Harrington," Olivia said, cutting her off. "The son of Robert's late business partner, presumed dead for years." Grace's eyes widened in shock. "What? How is that possible?" Olivia turned to face her, her gaze steely. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is what we do about it. His reappearance could cause chaos for this family, and I have a solution." Grace felt a knot form in her stomach. "What kind of solution?" "A marriage," Olivia said smoothly. "To you." Grace stared at her, stunned. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Olivia replied, her voice icy. "He's a nobody now, and marrying him would keep him in check. Think of it as charity, a way to rehabilitate him while preserving this family's reputation." Grace shook her head, her voice rising. "You're not making any sense. Why would I marry someone I don't even know?" "Because," Olivia said, her tone hardening, "if you don't, Your father's company will collapse. I've been holding it together, but without my intervention, it's only a matter of time before everything falls apart. Do you want to be the reason your father loses everything?" Tears welled in Grace's eyes as the weight of Olivia's words sank in. She knew her father's business had been struggling, but to hear it confirmed so bluntly was devastating. "Take the night to think about it," Olivia said, her voice softening into mock sympathy. "But I expect your decision by morning." As Olivia left the room, Grace buried her face in her hands. She felt trapped, torn between her love for her father and her revulsion at Olivia's manipulative scheme. Unbeknownst to her, Logan, Nathaniel, was about to become a permanent part of her life in a way she could never have imagined. Olivia Harrington was not a woman who took risks lightly. Every step she made, every decision she implemented, was calculated with precision. For years, she had maneuvered herself into the position of ultimate authority within the Harrington family. The reappearance of Nathaniel Harrington was a threat she could not ignore, but she saw an opportunity within this crisis to solidify her control. The next morning, Olivia summoned Grace to the grand dining room, its glittering chandeliers and sprawling mahogany table exuding wealth and power. Grace entered hesitantly, her face pale from a sleepless night spent wrestling with Olivia's ultimatum. She barely touched the untouched plate of breakfast set before her. "I trust you've had time to consider my proposition," Olivia said, not looking up from the documents she was signing. "It's not a proposition," Grace replied quietly, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "It's blackmail." Olivia finally raised her eyes, pinning Grace with a cold stare. "Call it what you will. The fact remains, this family's future rests on your decision." Grace's fingers clenched around the edge of her chair. "Why me? Why involve me in this? You don't even care about me." Olivia leaned back in her chair, a small smirk playing at her lips. "You're right, I don't care about you. But you're useful, Grace. You have an image, a reputation for kindness and charity that makes you seem genuine, relatable. People eat that up. Marrying Nathaniel, or Logan as he's known now, will paint you as a savior. It's a story the media will love." "And what about him?" Grace asked, her voice breaking. "What makes you think he'll agree to this?" "Oh, he will," Olivia said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "A man in his position can't afford to refuse a lifeline, no matter how humiliating it might seem." Grace's stomach churned at Olivia's words. She hated the cold, calculated way her stepmother spoke about Logan, as if he were nothing more than a pawn in her elaborate game. Later that day, Olivia made her way back into the heart of Seattle. She found Logan where she expected, still lingering on Pike Street, though with a more wary look in his eyes, as if he sensed trouble brewing. She approached him with deliberate confidence, her designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Logan watched her approach, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff but steady. Olivia stopped a few feet away, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I have a proposition for you," she said. Logan raised an eyebrow, his instincts screaming that whatever she had in mind couldn't be good. "I'm not interested." "You might want to hear me out," Olivia countered, her tone cool and controlled. "It's an offer that could change your life." Logan crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back against the wall. "Go on then. I'm listening." Olivia studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes taking in his gaunt frame, his unshaven face, the threadbare jacket that hung loosely over his shoulders. She could see the remnants of the man he had once been, the proud, confident Nathaniel Harrington. But she also saw desperation, and she knew how to exploit it. "I want you to marry my stepdaughter, Grace," Olivia said bluntly. Logan's eyes widened in shock, and he let out a bitter laugh. "You're joking." "I'm completely serious," Olivia replied. "It's a business arrangement. Marry Grace, and I'll compensate you handsomely, enough to get you off the streets and back on your feet." Logan's expression darkened. "Why would you want me to marry her? What's in it for you?" Olivia's smile tightened. "Let's just say it benefits everyone involved. Grace gets to play the saint, and you get a second chance. What could be better than that?" Logan didn't respond immediately. He knew there had to be more to Olivia's offer than she was letting on, but he also couldn't ignore the opportunity it presented. The streets had taught him to be cautious, but they had also taught him to recognize when survival meant taking a chance. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. The marriage will be temporary, Olivia said smoothly. A year, perhaps less. After that, you'll be free to go your own way, with a generous payout, of course. Logan's jaw tightened. He didn't trust her, but the promise of stability, however fleeting, was tempting. Still, something about Olivia's demeanor set his teeth on edge. She wasn't telling him everything, and he knew it. "I'll think about it," he said, pushing himself away from the wall. "Don't take too long," Olivia replied, her tone sharp. "The offer won't stay on the table forever." That evening, Logan sat alone in a quiet corner of the city, his thoughts a turbulent storm. The weight of Olivia's offer pressed heavily on his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that accepting it would mean stepping into something far more dangerous than he realized. Meanwhile, back at the Harrington estate, Grace stared out of her bedroom window, her heart heavy with dread. She didn't know who Logan truly was or the secrets Olivia was hiding, but she felt an undeniable pull to protect him, to shield him from whatever cruel game her stepmother was playing. Little did Grace know, Logan was already beginning to suspect the truth about Olivia, and that their fates were about to become irreversibly intertwined. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the city as Olivia prepared to finalize her scheme. She'd meticulously crafted her plan, ensuring no room for error. For her, the upcoming marriage wasn't just a tool to control Nathaniel. It was a reminder to Grace that defiance carried consequences. Logan sat on the bench where Olivia had left him earlier, staring at the crumpled flyer of a nearby shelter in his hand. He'd found the irony unbearable. Olivia's cold proposition dangled wealth and security, yet something about it felt like a trap he couldn't quite define. Before he could dwell too long on his misgivings, Olivia's sleek black car pulled up beside him once more. The tinted window rolled down, revealing her sharp, calculating expression. "Get in," she ordered curtly. Logan hesitated, his instincts screaming against the idea, but curiosity and the promise of answers pushed him to comply. The ride was silent, the hum of the engine the only sound as Olivia's driver navigated through the bustling streets. Logan couldn't help but notice the faint scent of expensive perfume wafting from Olivia, a reminder of the vast chasm between their worlds. "You've had time to think," Olivia began, breaking the silence. "I trust you've come to the right decision." Logan turned to her, his jaw tight. "I still don't understand why you want me to marry your stepdaughter. What's the real reason?" Olivia's lips twitched into a cold smile. "You're smarter than you look. Fine. The truth is, I need to protect this family's reputation. Grace's charitable nature has made her a liability. She needs to be reined in, and you're the perfect tool for the job." Logan's eyes narrowed. "So I'm just a pawn in your game?" "Precisely," Olivia said without a hint of shame. "But pawns have their uses. Play your role well, and you'll walk away with more than you could have ever dreamed." Logan leaned back, crossing his arms. "And if I say no?" Olivia's expression darkened. "I wouldn't recommend it. The streets can be unforgiving, and let's just say I have the resources to ensure you stay exactly where you are." The veiled threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Logan realized he was cornered, though not entirely powerless. He decided to play along, for now. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I have conditions." Olivia raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting resistance. "I'm listening." "First, I want everything in writing, the timeline, the payout, everything. Second, I won't be anyone's puppet. If I see something I don't like, I'm out." Olivia's smile returned, though it was tinged with condescension. "Agreed. But don't forget, Logan, you need me more than I need you. Keep that in mind." Back at the Harrington estate, Grace sat in her room, her thoughts a storm of anxiety and confusion. She hadn't seen Olivia since their conversation that morning, and the silence was almost worse than the confrontation. A knock at the door startled her. Before she could respond, Olivia swept in, her presence as imposing as ever. "It's done," Olivia announced, her tone brisk. "What's done?" Grace asked warily, standing from her chair. "The arrangements," Olivia said. "Logan has agreed to the marriage. The wedding will take place in 3 days." Grace's heart sank. 3 days? That's insane! I don't even know him." Olivia's gaze hardened. "You don't need to know him. This is about duty, not romance. You'll thank me when this is over." Grace shook her head, her voice trembling. "This is wrong, Olivia. You're using him and me for your own gain." "Spare me your moralizing," Olivia snapped. "The world doesn't operate on kindness and sentiment, Grace. It's time you learned that. Before Grace could respond, Olivia turned on her heel and left, the door closing behind her with a resounding click. Logan arrived at the estate later that evening, escorted by Olivia's driver. He stepped out of the car, feeling out of place amidst the sprawling mansion's grandeur. The last time he had been here, he had been Nathaniel Harrington, a young man full of ambition and promise. Now, he was Logan, a man stripped of everything but his wits and determination. Grace was waiting in the foyer, her arms crossed as she watched him approach. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're Logan," she said finally, her voice soft but cautious. "And you're Grace," Logan replied, his tone equally guarded. Grace hesitated, then stepped closer. "I don't know why you agreed to this, but—" "I didn't have much of a choice," Logan interrupted, his voice tinged with bitterness. Grace frowned, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Neither did I." Their shared resentment toward Olivia created an unspoken bond, though neither was ready to admit it. For now, they were strangers bound by circumstance, each trying to navigate the storm that Olivia had unleashed. As the days ticked by, preparations for the wedding moved at a dizzying pace. Olivia spared no expense, ensuring every detail was perfect. For her, the spectacle was as much about control as it was about appearances. Logan and Grace, meanwhile, found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of fittings, rehearsals, and forced interactions. Despite their initial tension, they began to find common ground. Logan admired Grace's quiet resilience, while Grace saw glimpses of a man shaped by hardship, but not entirely broken. On the eve of the wedding, Grace found Logan sitting alone in the garden, staring at the stars. She approached cautiously, her footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Logan glanced at her, then shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Grace sat beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Same here." For a moment, they sat in silence, the cool night air wrapping around them. "I don't know what Olivia has planned," Logan said quietly, "but I won't let her win." Grace turned to him, her eyes searching his. "Neither will I." In that moment, an unspoken alliance formed between them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And though neither of them knew it yet, their reluctant partnership would soon become the key to unraveling Olivia's carefully constructed empire. The grand mansion stood in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding within. The ballroom glittered with gold and crystal, a testament to Olivia's obsession with perfection. Every corner of the Harrington estate was carefully curated to reflect an image of wealth and power, an image that, for Olivia, was worth more than anything else in the world. But the reality of the day felt far from glamorous to Grace. She stood before the full-length mirror in her bridal suite, staring at her reflection. The ivory dress she wore shimmered in the soft lighting, but to Grace, it felt more like a prison than a symbol of marriage. Her fingers brushed the lace at her neck, but the fabric didn't comfort her. It was a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen from her ideals. She thought of her father, Robert. She knew that he had always tried his best to shield her from Olivia's manipulations, but this time, there was no escaping the fate that had been thrust upon her. The business was failing, and though Grace hated to admit it, she knew Olivia had used that fact to force her hand. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Miss Grace, the guests are arriving," the voice of a servant called through the wood. Grace sighed and turned away from the mirror. She had no choice but to face the day ahead. In another part of the mansion, Logan paced nervously. The suit Olivia had selected for him felt like a costume, fancy, tight, and uncomfortable. He hadn't worn anything like it since before everything had gone wrong, back when he had been Nathaniel Harrington, heir to a fortune. That man was long gone, replaced by the man who had survived the streets, and yet here he was, forced into a role he never asked for. Olivia had made it clear, this marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. He was to play his part, keep his head down, and in return, walk away with a life he could never have dreamed of while living on the streets. But as he stood in front of the mirror, staring at the man staring back at him, Logan felt something stir inside him, a deep, uncomfortable sense of guilt. He had agreed to marry Grace, yes, but something about the entire situation felt wrong. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew that the woman he was about to marry wasn't just a stranger. She was being forced into this, just as he had been. And as much as he tried to rationalize it, the situation felt like a betrayal to her. He ran his hand through his hair, trying to calm his nerves. He needed to go through with it. It was the only way he would have any chance of surviving this. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far darker. Grace was led down the grand staircase by one of the servants, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The guests had already arrived, and the ballroom was filled with the hum of low conversation. But as she reached the bottom of the stairs, everything fell silent. All eyes turned toward her, and she felt a sickening wave of self-consciousness wash over her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the heaviness of Olivia's expectations suffocating her every move. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but instead, it felt like the culmination of every mistake, every misstep, every compromise she had made. When her eyes met Logan's, standing at the altar, her breath hitched. He looked out of place here, just as she did. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable. But as their gazes locked, there was a brief flicker of understanding between them. A silent acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation they found themselves in. With a deep breath, Grace forced herself to walk toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last, and by the time she reached the altar, the space between them seemed insurmountable. The ceremony began, but Grace's mind was elsewhere. She could hear the priest's words, but they felt like background noise. She wasn't really here, not in the way everyone thought. She wasn't marrying Logan, not in any meaningful sense. She was simply fulfilling a duty that had been imposed on her, a duty that had nothing to do with love or choice. The vows were read, but Grace barely registered them. It wasn't until the moment came for her to say "I do" that she realized just how deep she had sunk into this nightmare. But before she could answer, Logan's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. "I have something to say," he declared, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The room fell silent, every eye on him as Grace looked at him in shock. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. What was he doing? "I'm not who you think I am," Logan continued, his eyes scanning the room, his voice strong and unwavering. "I'm Nathaniel Harrington, the rightful heir to the Harrington fortune." Gasps echoed through the room, and Grace's heart seemed to stop beating. Her breath caught in her throat as the words sank in. Nathaniel Harrington, the man everyone thought was dead, was standing before her, not the homeless man she had been forced to marry. Nathaniel took a step forward, his voice growing more intense as he spoke. "Years ago, after my father died, I was believed to be dead as well, but the truth is I was taken away, hidden from the world by someone who wanted to take my place." Grace's mind raced, struggling to piece the revelation together. Olivia had been behind it all, the mysterious disappearance, the secretive manipulation. But why? "Olivia," Nathaniel said, his eyes locking on her, "you thought you could control everything. You thought you could erase me, erase my claim to the Harrington fortune. But you were wrong." Olivia stood frozen, her face pale as she tried to maintain her composure. She opened her mouth to protest, but Nathaniel wasn't finished. "I have the evidence," he said, pulling a folder from his jacket and tossing it onto the altar. "Photographs, documents, and accounts from those who helped me survive. I know everything." The room was in chaos, murmurs of disbelief filling the air. Olivia's eyes darted around the room, but the once steely confidence she had exuded was slipping away. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth," Nathaniel continued, his gaze unwavering. "You're done, Olivia. It's over." The doors to the ballroom suddenly burst open, and 2 federal agents entered, their presence commanding the room. Olivia's face drained of color as they moved toward her. "You're under arrest," one of the agents said, "for conspiracy, fraud, and the murder of Nathaniel Harrington's father." As the agents led Olivia away in cuffs, Grace stood in stunned silence. She looked at Nathaniel, her heart racing. The truth had come to light, and with it, everything was about to change. The once majestic ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and opulent decorations, now felt like a hollow shell. The guests who had come to celebrate a marriage were now standing frozen, their eyes flickering between Nathaniel and Olivia as federal agents escorted the latter out of the room. The murmurs of disbelief grew louder, and Grace could feel the tension in the air thickening like smoke. Her heart was still pounding in her chest. but her thoughts were a whirlwind. Nathaniel? Logan. Was Nathaniel Harrington, the man she had just agreed to marry for the sake of a business deal. The same Nathaniel who, by all accounts, had been presumed dead for years. His true identity had been buried under layers of lies and deception, and now it was all being exposed before her, in front of her father's business associates, in front of the people who had once feared and revered the Harrington name. As Olivia was led away, her face twisted in a mix of rage and fear, Grace couldn't help but wonder how she had never seen through her stepmother's schemes. Olivia had always been cold, calculating, always more concerned with power than people. But this betrayal of everything Grace had been taught to believe in was beyond anything she had imagined. Nathaniel. Grace whispered his name as though she was still trying to wrap her mind around the enormity of it all. He turned to her, his eyes softening, but the tension in his expression remained. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Grace shook her head, still reeling. I don't know what to say. It's too much." "I know," Nathaniel replied, his voice steady but with a hint of regret. "But I wanted you to know the truth, and I wanted everyone else to know too. It's the only way this nightmare ends for both of us." She looked at him, trying to see past the man who had lived on the streets to understand the person he had once been, the heir to a powerful empire that had been stolen from him. And for the first time, she realized that all along, they had shared the same kind of suffering, though in vastly different ways. As the room continued to buzz with confusion, Grace's father, Robert, appeared at her side. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he took in the scene before him. The arrest of Olivia was a blow, but it was only the beginning. The truth about the Harrington fortune, about his daughter's place in it, was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "Grace," Robert said hoarsely, placing a hand on her shoulder. I don't know what to say." "I know, Dad," she replied quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "None of us knew, but Olivia's the one who's been behind everything. She's the one who made all those decisions, destroying Nathaniel's life, tearing our family apart. She thought she could control us all." Her voice caught on the last words, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. Nathaniel's expression hardened as he looked toward the agents leading Olivia out. "She did more than just control," he said bitterly. "She murdered my father, and she would have let me rot, pretending I was dead, all for the sake of money and power." Grace felt her stomach churn at the revelation, but it wasn't just the shock of learning Olivia's true nature that left her reeling. It was the knowledge that her own family, her father, her very foundation, had been manipulated just as she had been. It was hard to fathom that everything she had once believed in was a lie. "Nathaniel," Robert said slowly, his voice now steady with a quiet strength. "I owe you an apology. I never knew, but I should have been more aware. Olivia was always ambitious, but I didn't see how far she'd go to secure her position. You've been living in the shadows all this time, and for that, I'm sorry. We need to make things right." Nathaniel nodded, but his gaze was far away. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about stopping Olivia from continuing to destroy everything." Grace stood silently, taking in the gravity of his words. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but with Olivia's arrest, the Harrington Empire was no longer under her control. It would be Nathaniel's to reclaim, but reclaiming the empire was only part of the story. Nathaniel needed answers, answers that only he could uncover. The business dealings, the property acquisitions, the shady people Olivia had involved herself with. They all had to be exposed. And as much as Grace wanted to remain in the background, she knew she couldn't sit idly by. This wasn't just about Nathaniel's inheritance anymore. This was about the future of everything. The future of her family, her father's business, and the legacy they had all been manipulated into preserving. The days that followed the wedding were a blur of activity. Nathaniel took control of the estate, navigating the complicated world Olivia had built around her. But the more he learned, the more he realized just how deep the corruption ran. His own name had been tarnished, used as a pawn in a game he hadn't even known he was part of. He had been presumed dead for years, all while Olivia took every opportunity to bend the family's fortune to her will. But there was a glimmer of hope in the middle of it all. Grace had stood by him when she could have easily turned away. Though her role in this had been forced upon her, she was beginning to see the larger picture. And with her help, Nathaniel knew he could make things right. One evening, as Nathaniel sat in the study of the mansion, reviewing documents that would help expose Olivia's financial crimes, Grace entered. Her face was drawn, the weight of everything they had learned in the last few days settling in her eyes. "Are you sure about all of this?" she asked, her voice soft but resolute. "Are you sure you want to go this far? It's not just about clearing your name anymore. It's about what happens after." Nathaniel looked up at her, his expression hardening, but his voice gentle. "I don't have a choice. Not anymore. Olivia has taken so much, and I won't let her destroy any more lives. Not mine, not yours, not my family's." Grace nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding passing between them. She knew what it meant to have everything taken away from you. And she knew what it felt like to reclaim it, if only for the chance to do something good with it. The foundation had already been set. The pieces were in place. And now they would fight not just for the Harrington name, but for the future of the empire, and for a future that was shaped by compassion rather than greed. Together, they would rise from the ashes of Olivia's betrayal and build something lasting, something worth fighting for. The truth had been revealed, but it was only the beginning. There was still much work to be done. The silence in the ballroom was deafening as Olivia was led away by federal agents, her shoulders sagging in defeat, her once imposing figure now reduced to a broken shell. The guests stood in stunned silence, processing the shocking revelations that had just unfolded. The truth had come crashing down like a tidal wave, sweeping away the carefully constructed facade Olivia had built over the years. And standing at the center of it all, Nathaniel, no longer the homeless man, but Nathaniel Harrington, rightful heir to a legacy stolen from him, held the power to expose the full extent of her betrayal. Grace stood at Nathaniel's side, her heart pounding in her chest, her emotions a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and confusion. The gravity of the moment was not lost on her, but there was a part of her that still couldn't fully comprehend the truth. Olivia, the woman who had been a second mother to her, the one who had shaped her life and her choices, had orchestrated one of the darkest betrayals in history. Not only had Olivia manipulated Grace into a marriage that never should have been, but she had orchestrated the murder of Nathaniel's father, ensuring that the Harrington fortune stayed firmly under her control. Nathaniel, his face a mask of determination, turned away from the shocked crowd, his eyes focused on the horizon as if contemplating the road ahead. His voice was low but firm when he spoke. "This isn't over. This is just the beginning." Grace could see the weight of those words in his eyes. She knew what it meant. Olivia's arrest was only the first step, and as much as Grace wanted to believe that it was the end of the nightmare, the truth was far more complicated. The empire Olivia had built was vast, its roots embedded deep within the highest echelons of society. There would be no easy path to reclaiming what had been lost. The guests, who had once viewed Nathaniel's reappearance with suspicion, now found themselves faced with the uncomfortable reality that they had been complicit in Olivia's reign of manipulation. Some of them, especially those who had benefited most from Olivia's control, began to murmur among themselves, exchanging furtive glances. The truth had come out, but the true extent of the corruption was still hidden beneath the surface. Nathaniel felt the weight of their eyes on him, but he didn't flinch. He had been through too much to care about their opinions now. His focus was on the future, on restoring what had been taken from him, and on righting the wrongs that had been done to Grace, to his family, and to himself. As the federal agents took Olivia away, Grace's father, Robert, moved toward Nathaniel, his expression one of shock and disbelief. "Nathaniel, I didn't know. I never knew. Olivia." His voice trailed off, as if searching for the right words to explain his own complicity in Olivia's reign. His face was pale, his body stiff with the realization that the woman he had trusted, his own wife, was nothing more than a criminal mastermind. "It's not your fault," Nathaniel said quietly, his tone calm despite the storm swirling inside him. "Olivia had you all wrapped around her finger. She's a master manipulator. But the truth is out now, and it's time for everything to change." Robert nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I owe you so much. I didn't know what I was protecting. I thought I was doing what was best for the family. He looked at Grace, his voice faltering. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just as blind as everyone else. Grace reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but firm. We all made mistakes, Dad, but what matters now is what we do next. Nathaniel turned to face them both. What we do next is simple. We take back control. The Harrington fortune doesn't belong to Olivia. It belongs to me, and it will be used for something better than just power and wealth. It will be used to do good, to help people, to rebuild everything she tore down. Grace's eyes widened at his words, and for the first time, she saw the full extent of his vision. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was his by right. It was about rebuilding, about transforming everything Olivia had twisted into something dark, into something that could bring light into the world. She didn't know exactly what that would look like, but she knew that with Nathaniel's determination, they could make it happen. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, legal battles, and planning. Olivia's arrest was only the beginning of the unraveling of her empire. With Nathaniel's help, federal investigators uncovered evidence that would bring down the far-reaching web of corruption she had spun over the years. There were properties to be seized, documents to be reviewed, and people to be held accountable. But as much as the legal battles and the media frenzy took center stage, there was one thing Nathaniel was focused on above all else: rebuilding the Harrington legacy. And Grace was by his side through it all. Slowly, she came to understand the depth of Nathaniel's vision. He wasn't just reclaiming an empire for himself. He was reclaiming it for everyone who had been hurt by Olivia's actions, for every person who had been left behind in her pursuit of power. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for what would become the Harrington Foundation, an initiative dedicated to providing housing, education, and job opportunities to the homeless. It wasn't just about charity. It was about empowerment. It was about giving people the chance to rebuild their lives the way Nathaniel had rebuilt his own. As Nathaniel took the reins of the Harrington estate, he found himself drawn into the intricacies of running a massive business empire. But it was never just about the money. With each decision he made, he kept his focus on the people, the workers, the families, the communities that would benefit from the foundation's efforts. One evening, as they sat together in the now familiar study of the Harrington mansion, Grace turned to Nathaniel, her eyes reflecting the weight of everything they had been through. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Olivia had never come into our lives?" she asked softly. Nathaniel paused, his gaze distant as he considered her question. "I think about it a lot," he said quietly. "But the truth is, I wouldn't be who I am without everything that's happened. The pain, the loss, the betrayal. It all shaped me, and I think it shaped you too." Grace met his eyes, her voice steady. "It did. But it's not just the past that shapes us. It's what we choose to do with it." Nathaniel smiled faintly, a sense of peace settling over him. "You're right, and we've chosen to make things right, together." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling around them like a quiet storm. They had come so far, but the work was only just beginning. As they looked toward the future, they knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But they also knew that they would face them together, stronger, more determined, and more united than ever before. And in that moment, as they looked out over the city that had once been a place of pain and darkness, they saw the glimmer of a new dawn on the horizon. A dawn filled with hope, with purpose, and with the promise of a brighter future. Together, they would make it happen. Together, they would build something that would last. A legacy not of greed and manipulation, but of kindness, compassion, and a commitment to changing the world one step at a time. With Olivia's arrest, the Harrington estate underwent a dramatic transformation. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of power and corruption, now felt like a shell, empty, echoing with the remnants of a bygone era. The grandiose halls that had seen countless parties, scheming, and deception now seemed to whisper of the past, as if even the walls were aching for the truth to be fully revealed. Nathaniel, standing at the threshold of the mansion's front doors, surveyed the sprawling estate. He had spent so many years imagining what it would be like to reclaim his birthright, to return to this place as the rightful heir to the Harrington fortune. But now that the moment had come, He felt nothing like the man he had once dreamed of becoming. Instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about wealth. This was about something much bigger, a chance to make amends, to restore the dignity that had been stolen from him, and to create a legacy that would benefit others, not just the privileged few. Grace stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the same quiet determination. Since the shocking turn of events, she had become a constant presence at his side. She had watched him navigate the immense task of taking control of the empire, and although she had been thrust into the heart of this chaotic world, she had never faltered. She had found her place not just as his partner, but as his equal, someone who shared his vision and believed in the future they could build together. "We can do this," Grace said softly, her voice carrying the weight of their shared commitment. "We have to. There's no turning back now." Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze steady, as though he were seeing her for the first time in this new light. "We've already started, but this isn't just about taking control of this place. It's about using everything we have to build something that matters." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, strategic planning, and paperwork. The legal battles surrounding Olivia's empire were far from over, and the weight of it all often felt suffocating. But Nathaniel had a plan. He had always been a man of action, and now more than ever, he needed to ensure that everything Olivia had built, that all the wealth and influence she had wielded, would be redirected toward a better future. Grace was there every step of the way. In the quiet moments, when the work seemed endless and the pressure was overwhelming, she would offer him a steadying hand, reminding him why they had chosen this path. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for the Harrington Foundation, an initiative that would focus on affordable housing, education, and job training for the homeless. The foundation became their lifeblood. It wasn't just about philanthropy, it was about redemption. It was about using the resources at their disposal to address the issues that had always seemed so distant from the elite world they had grown up in. But now, it was personal. Every decision they made had a ripple effect, touching lives in ways they had never anticipated. As the foundation took shape, Nathaniel found himself becoming more and more entrenched in the cause. He poured his energy into meeting with community leaders, organizing fundraising efforts, and working with those who had firsthand experience of the struggles that the foundation aimed to address. Each conversation felt like a step closer to the vision he had for the future, one where power wasn't just something to be hoarded, but something to be shared, something to be used for the greater good. Grace, too, found her own role within the foundation. She had always been driven by a desire to help others, to make a difference. As she became more involved, her passion for the cause grew. It was clear that she was no longer the reluctant participant in this mission. She had become a force in her own right, a woman with a vision, someone who could see the bigger picture and had the strength to help make it a reality. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Nathaniel and Grace stood together on the balcony of the mansion, overlooking the city. The view had always been a symbol of the power that had once belonged to the Harrington family, but now it felt like a canvas, an opportunity to paint a new future. "There's so much work to do," Nathaniel murmured, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "But we're making progress." Grace looked out over the city, her expression soft but resolute. "We've come a long way, and we'll keep going, one step at a time." Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the setting sun bathed the city in a golden light. He had always been driven by the desire to prove himself, to reclaim what had been stolen from him. But now, he understood that the real victory wasn't in the wealth or the status. It was in the change they could bring to the world. Weeks passed, and the Harrington Foundation began to gain momentum. Their first major project, a community center that would provide affordable housing and job training to the homeless, was announced. It was a groundbreaking initiative, one that would provide a lifeline to those who had been overlooked and forgotten by society. Nathaniel and Grace worked tirelessly, side by side, to bring the project to life. They met with architects, city planners, and community leaders, ensuring that every detail was in place. The project was ambitious, but it was the kind of change that Nathaniel had always wanted to see in the world. It wasn't just about charity. It was about empowerment, about giving people the tools and the resources to rebuild their lives. The day the foundation broke ground was one of the most significant moments of Nathaniel's life. He stood at the front of a crowd of supporters and workers, his heart swelling with pride as the first shovel hit the earth. This was his legacy, his new beginning. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome, of everything he had fought for. Grace stood beside him, her eyes shining with pride. She had seen the transformation in Nathaniel, the way he had grown into the man he was always meant to be, and she had grown too. Their partnership had become something powerful, a union rooted in mutual respect, in shared vision, and in love. As the crowd cheered, Nathaniel turned to Grace and smiled. "This is just the start," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. Grace smiled back, her heart full. "I know, and we're going to change the world, together." With the first step taken, they knew there would be many more challenges ahead. But they also knew that they were stronger than ever, united by a shared purpose, bound by the belief that together they could make a difference. And as the sun set over the city, casting its golden glow across the construction site, Nathaniel and Grace felt the weight of the future before them. But they also felt hope. Hope that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. And in the end, they would leave a legacy that would endure for generations to come. Together, they had already begun to change the world, and they would continue, one step at a time. As the months passed, the Harrington Foundation began to take on a life of its own, expanding its reach and garnering widespread support. Nathaniel and Grace had become the public faces of the charity, attending events, meeting with city officials, and sharing their story. But while their efforts were gaining momentum, there were still challenges, especially from those who had been loyal to Olivia, still lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to undermine everything they had worked for. Despite the lingering opposition, Nathaniel and Grace had found solace in each other. They had grown into a solid, united force, their bond strengthening with every challenge they overcame. What had begun as an arrangement to protect their families' futures had evolved into something deeper, something more meaningful. At night, when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear, they would retreat to the balcony of the mansion, watching as the city lights twinkled beneath the vast expanse of the sky. It had become their refuge, a space where they could reflect on their journey and dream about the future they were building together. But in these quiet moments, the subject of their future was often on their minds. The foundation had grown faster than they had anticipated, and with each new project they launched, they knew that their vision was becoming more and more real. Grace sat beside Nathaniel, her legs tucked beneath her, the cool evening breeze ruffling her hair. She looked out over the city, lost in thought. "Do you ever wonder what Olivia would think if she could see us now?" Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I think she'd be furious," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But I think she'd also be impressed. We've turned her empire into something far greater than she ever could have." Grace nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "We've done something good, but sometimes it still feels like there's so much more we need to do." Nathaniel turned to her, his expression softening. "And we will, one step at a time." Grace smiled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You know, when I first met you, I thought your world was so different from mine. But now, I feel like I belong here, with you, in this world we're building." Nathaniel reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You do belong here. You've always belonged here. This foundation, this new life, it wouldn't be what it is without you." The words resonated with Grace, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Nathaniel, but for everything they had created together. They had come from such different worlds, but they had found common ground in their desire to do good, to change the world in ways that mattered. Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly to expand the foundation's reach. They partnered with other organizations, raised awareness, and initiated new programs aimed at breaking the cycle of homelessness and poverty. Their work touched countless lives, and the impact of their efforts began to be felt across the city. Grace, with her unique perspective on the world, took the lead on a new initiative to offer housing and job training to women who had been victims of domestic violence. She had seen firsthand how so many women struggled to escape abusive relationships without the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Through the foundation, she had found a way to give them that chance. Nathaniel, meanwhile, focused on expanding their efforts to provide affordable housing. His experience navigating the complexities of the Harrington fortune gave him the skills he needed to tackle even the most difficult financial challenges. Together, they complemented each other in ways they had never expected, each one filling in the gaps where the other struggled. Their efforts were starting to make waves in the media, and the public was taking notice. Nathaniel and Grace had become symbols of hope, a couple who had overcome their pasts and turned tragedy into triumph. They had gone from being a reluctant partnership to a power couple in the world of philanthropy, their combined efforts making a tangible difference in the lives of people who had long been forgotten. But as their success grew, so did the pressure. They had taken on a monumental task, and every day brought new challenges. There were days when the weight of responsibility felt unbearable, when they both wondered if they were doing enough, if they could ever achieve everything they had set out to do. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, they found themselves once again on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink. The city below them seemed to pulse with life, and for a moment, the enormity of their mission felt distant, as though they were simply two people sharing a quiet moment together. Grace leaned against the railing, her eyes closed, her face bathed in the warm glow of the fading sun. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Nathaniel joined her, standing close but not quite touching. He looked out at the skyline, taking in the familiar view that had once felt so alien to him. Every day. It's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short time. Grace smiled, turning to face him. And it's just the beginning. Nathaniel's heart swelled with pride, not just for what they had accomplished, but for what they were about to build. They weren't just two people trying to make a difference. They were a force for change, a pair of visionaries determined to reshape the future. And they were in it together, no matter what the world threw at them. "I couldn't have done this without you, Grace," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're everything I never knew I needed." Grace reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "And you're everything I never knew I wanted. Together, we've built something that matters. And we're just getting started." As they stood there, hand in hand, watching the city beneath them, they knew that their work was far from over. They had a vision, a dream for a better future, and they were determined to see it through. With every new project, every life they touched, they were moving closer to the world they envisioned. A world where compassion, kindness, and opportunity were available to all. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its last rays over the city, Nathaniel and Grace knew that their shared vision had only just begun. The future was theirs to shape, together. Months passed in a blur of meetings, late nights, and constant decisions. But through it all, Nathaniel and Grace had found a rhythm, an unspoken understanding that they were in this for the long haul. They had built something beautiful together, but the true weight of their mission was just beginning to settle in. Every day brought new challenges, and the city, as vibrant as it was, still had its undercurrents of inequality and poverty, challenges that Nathaniel and Grace couldn't ignore. The Harrington Foundation had grown exponentially, and its impact was being felt far beyond the confines of their city. New partnerships were being forged, the support from the public swelling with each new initiative. But there was one project that stood out among all others: the community center and affordable housing development they had envisioned from the very beginning. It had been a dream, a lofty idea they had thrown around late at night on the balcony, a place where people could not only find shelter, but could rebuild their lives from the ground up. A space where the cycle of homelessness could be broken, and people could find the tools and resources they needed to stand on their own 2 feet. It was their magnum opus, a legacy they could leave behind, a symbol of everything they had fought for. The project was ambitious, a sprawling complex that would feature affordable housing, a job training facility, childcare services, and a community center dedicated to wellness and education. It was a one-stop shop for people in need, a beacon of hope in an area that had long been neglected. But getting it off the ground was no easy task. Construction was complicated, and there were obstacles at every turn. Local politicians who were hesitant to back such an expansive project, a group of developers with deep pockets who were more interested in turning the area into high-end condos. And, of course, the ever-present shadow of Olivia's former supporters, still trying to find ways to sabotage their efforts. Despite all the setbacks, Nathaniel and Grace pressed on. The day the first shovel hit the ground was a day of triumph. It was a cold, overcast morning, but the air was thick with excitement. The community center had become more than just a project. It had become a symbol of their shared vision for the future. Nathaniel and Grace stood side by side, their hands wrapped around the golden shovel, ready to break the earth and begin the work that would change the lives of thousands. "We've come a long way," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice tinged with emotion as he looked out over the crowd gathered for the ceremony. "But this is just the beginning. This project is for the people who have been left behind, for those who have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. This is for them." Grace stood beside him, her expression calm but determined. "This is for a future where no one has to choose between survival and dignity. A future where everyone has the chance to succeed, no matter where they come from." The crowd erupted into applause as the first dig was made, and the sound of the earth shifting beneath the shovel felt like the beginning of something much larger than either of them could have imagined. But the project wasn't without its challenges. The local opposition was fierce. A wealthy group of developers who had their sights set on the land where the community center was being built filed lawsuits claiming the land was being misused. They painted the project as a burden on the community, arguing that the space should be repurposed for high-end real estate development. The battle in the courts was long and grueling, but Nathaniel and Grace never wavered. They had the support of the community, and they weren't about to back down. In the midst of these battles, Grace found herself questioning whether she was truly prepared for the weight of this responsibility. There were times when the pressure felt overwhelming. There were moments when she wondered if they were in over their heads, if they were really equipped to handle the enormity of the task at hand. But it was Nathaniel who always reminded her why they were doing this. He had become more than just a business partner. He had become her rock, her support, her partner in every sense of the word. One evening, as they sat in the office of the mansion, poring over the latest plans for the community center, Grace sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Nathaniel. Every time I think we're getting ahead, something else comes up. And it's hard. So hard." Nathaniel, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of raw emotion to it. "I know it's hard, Grace, but you have to remember why we're doing this, why we're here. We've already changed so many lives, and we're not going to stop until we've changed the lives of every single person who needs us." Grace looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never doubted their cause, but in those moments of exhaustion, when the pressure became unbearable, it was easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. She took a deep breath, feeling the strength of Nathaniel's resolve radiating in the room. It reminded her why she couldn't give up. "You're right," she said softly, her voice filled with renewed determination. "We're not stopping." With that, the two of them threw themselves back into the work, pouring every ounce of energy into seeing the project through. The construction continued, slowly but surely. The foundation's resources were stretched thin, but there was always a sense of purpose in every task they undertook, every new donation that came in, every partner who joined the cause. And as the months went by, the community center began to take shape. It was becoming more than just a structure. It was becoming a living, breathing entity, a place of hope and possibility. Nathaniel and Grace spent every free moment walking through the site, watching as walls went up, windows were installed, and the space began to come alive with the promise of something better. They would talk to the workers, meet with local community leaders, and take time to hear the stories of the people who would one day walk through the doors of the center. One particularly cold morning, As they toured the site, Nathaniel paused for a moment and looked at Grace, his gaze soft but serious. This is what it's all about, Grace. This is our legacy. This is what we've been working for. Grace nodded, her heart swelling with pride as she looked around at the progress they had made. Yes, this is just the beginning. And with that, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had built something that mattered, something that would outlast them both. A legacy of hope, compassion, and the belief that a single act of kindness could change the world. The community center's construction was completed ahead of schedule, a testament to the tireless work of Nathaniel, Grace, and their team. Yet, even with the building now standing as a monument to their dreams, their real work was only just beginning. The true test was in the community's response, how the people they sought to help would embrace the resources and opportunities they were offering. The grand opening of the center was a momentous occasion. The Harrington Foundation had invited everyone: city officials, business leaders, community advocates, and, of course, the people the center was designed to serve. The event was a true reflection of the transformation they had made, from the mansion once steeped in secrets and manipulation to a space that embodied hope and second chances. As the ribbon was cut and the doors were thrown open, the crowd erupted in applause. The vibrant new community center, filled with classrooms, training rooms, and supportive spaces, was a stark contrast to the hopelessness and neglect that had previously defined this part of the city. Nathaniel stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had fought for. "This is more than just a building," he said, his tone steady yet filled with emotion. "This is a place where people can rebuild their lives, where they can find purpose and dignity, and it's only possible because of all of you. Together, we are creating a future where no one has to feel invisible, no one has to suffer alone." Grace stood beside him, her heart swelling with pride. The path that had led them here had been anything but easy, but had been worth every sacrifice. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces filled with hope and determination, and felt a sense of fulfillment that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She knew in that moment that they had changed the course of many lives forever. As the day unfolded, the impact of their work became clear. People poured in, eager to learn more about the services available. There were those looking for job training, others who needed help with housing applications, and some simply looking for a safe place to rest and gather their thoughts. The atmosphere was one of camaraderie and support. People who had once been isolated, forgotten by society, were now part of something bigger than themselves. One woman, in particular, caught Grace's attention. She was a middle-aged mother, her hands rough from years of hard labor. But there was something in her eyes that sparked recognition. She had been homeless for years, struggling to care for her children while trying to make ends meet. Grace had heard her story before. There were so many like her. Yet there was a quiet resilience in this woman's gaze, a spark of hope that had never been extinguished. As they spoke, Grace offered her a warm smile. "The center can help you with job training, childcare, housing assistance. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I never thought I'd see a place like this. It feels like a chance, a real chance." Grace's heart ached for the woman, but she also felt a deep sense of purpose. This was the reason they had fought so hard. This was the legacy they were building, one of compassion, community, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved a second chance. The opening ceremony was only the beginning. Over the next several weeks, the community center became a hub of activity. Nathaniel and Grace were constantly involved, meeting with those they were helping, ensuring that the services provided were not only accessible, but effective. They worked with local businesses to secure job placements, partnered with educational institutions to provide mentorship programs, and rallied the city to support their cause. But as they became more deeply involved in the lives of those they were helping, they realized that the center's success depended on much more than just the resources available. It required unity. It required that the community come together, not just to accept help, but to offer it in return. Grace and Nathaniel began organizing community building events. These weren't just workshops or meetings, but opportunities for the people the center served to connect with one another, share their stories, and form bonds that went beyond mere charity. They encouraged everyone, from the wealthiest to the most vulnerable, to participate in the vision they were creating. The message was clear. No one was above or below anyone else. We rise together, or we don't rise at all. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of resistance, times when it seemed like certain people weren't ready to embrace the idea of equality and shared responsibility. But slowly, something incredible began to happen. The people who once felt like outsiders started to take ownership of the space. They helped one another, they mentored, and they brought their ideas to the table. One day, as Nathaniel and Grace were discussing the future of the foundation over lunch, a young man approached them. He was in his early 20s, his clothes worn, but there was a glint of something fierce in his eyes. He introduced himself as Marcus, a former resident of the shelter, and he had an idea for a new initiative. I've been thinking about a way to bring in young people from the streets, teach them skills that they can use to help others. I know we've got the job training programs, but I think it could go further. We could create a mentorship program, young people teaching others how to survive, how to rebuild. People like us know the real struggle. We could teach them how to use what we've learned to make a difference. Grace and Nathaniel exchanged a look. It was exactly the kind of initiative they had hoped for, a chance for people to take ownership of their own futures, to become leaders in their own right. "That's an amazing idea, Marcus," Nathaniel said, his voice filled with admiration. "You have the drive and the vision. Let's make it happen." And so Marcus's idea became the next phase of their work. The mentorship program was born out of the community itself, a program run by the very people who had once been in need of help. It became one of the foundation's most successful initiatives, not only providing valuable skills to young people, but fostering a sense of pride and empowerment within the community. As the foundation flourished, so did Nathaniel and Grace's bond. They had come from two very different worlds, each of them scarred by their past, but they had found a way to heal together. They had faced countless obstacles, but together they had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. Late one evening, as they walked through the grounds of the community center, watching families gather in the newly constructed park, Grace took Nathaniel's hand. "This is what we were meant to do," she said softly. He squeezed her hand gently, his heart full of gratitude. "Yes, together we've built something that will last, something that will outlive us." And as they stood there, watching the community they had helped build, they knew their legacy was not in the wealth they had once fought for, but in the lives they had touched, the people they had helped, and the unity they had fostered. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape. The months passed, and the transformation was undeniable. Nathaniel and Grace stood on the balcony of their newly renovated mansion, the sun setting behind them, casting a warm golden glow over the city below. The once opulent estate, a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a beacon of hope, a place that had witnessed the change from corruption to compassion. The community center, now a thriving hub of activity, had become a focal point for their mission. Nathaniel and Grace had not only revived their family name, but had transformed it into something entirely new, something worthy of the legacy they had built together. They had poured every ounce of themselves into this venture, not for personal gain, but because they knew it was their calling. They were determined to build a future where no one would ever have to face the same hardships they had endured. From the start, they knew they couldn't do it alone. The success of the foundation had relied on the collaboration of a network of community leaders, volunteers, and local businesses that believed in their mission. Nathaniel had called on his connections, but he had been careful. This wasn't about using his family name to secure power or money. It was about uniting people for a cause that transcended all of that. And it had worked. People from all walks of life had come together, each contributing their time, skills, and passion to a cause that made them all feel like part of something bigger than themselves. As Nathaniel gazed at the city below, he could feel the weight of what they had accomplished. But there was still so much to be done. The foundation was growing, its influence spreading far beyond the city, and more people were coming forward with ideas for how they could continue to expand their work. New projects were being discussed, new partnerships were being formed, and new ways to provide for those in need were being explored. The future was bright, yes, but it was also full of challenges. Grace stood beside him, her gaze soft but determined. She had come a long way from the young woman who had once been forced into a marriage she had no desire for, and the woman standing next to Nathaniel now was strong, independent, and fiercely committed to the vision they shared. She had fought for this life, fought to make sure that the suffering and manipulation of her past would never define her future. As they spoke of the foundation's next steps, Grace's mind wandered to the people they had helped. To the young woman who had found a job after years of living on the streets. To the family that had moved into a safe and affordable home. To the former addict who had turned his life around with of their support programs. These were the real victories. Those lives that had been changed forever because they had dared to believe that things could be different. "We've come so far," Grace said, her voice steady. "But we can't stop now. There are still so many people out there who need our help." Nathaniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We've created something that has the power to change the future, not just for this city, but for communities everywhere. But you're right. We can't rest on our laurels. There's still work to be done." Grace turned to face him, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "Together, we've built something extraordinary. But I believe we can take it even further. We can inspire others, bring more people into the fold, and create a movement that can't be ignored." Nathaniel smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He had never imagined his life would take this turn. He had never imagined that the pain and betrayal he had experienced would become the catalyst for something so transformative. And yet, here they were. Together, they had found a way to turn the very things that had torn them apart, greed, manipulation, and power, into a force for good. They had found a way to take their past pain and use it to fuel the hope of countless others. But as much as they had accomplished, they knew that the true test of their work would come in the years to follow. Would their foundation continue to grow and thrive? Would they be able to inspire future generations to take up the mantle and keep pushing for change? The challenges ahead were daunting, but Nathaniel and Grace were no strangers to adversity. They had already proven that they could overcome the most insurmountable odds. And in each other, they had found a source of strength that would see them through whatever came next. Their partnership was built not just on shared vision, but on deep respect, trust, and love. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. The conversation turned to the future, and as they discussed their plans, they realized that they were not just building a legacy for themselves. They were building a legacy for their children and for the generations to come. They were creating a world where kindness and compassion were valued more than wealth and power. A world where no one was left behind. The foundation was growing, but it was only the beginning. As Nathaniel and Grace looked out at the horizon, they knew that the work they had started together would continue to ripple out, affecting countless lives in ways they had yet to imagine. They had given people a chance to rebuild, to rise above their circumstances, and to believe in themselves again. And as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the skyline, Nathaniel and Grace stood hand in hand, their hearts full of hope for the future. Together, Nathaniel said softly, "We can change the world." Grace squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with conviction, one step at a time. And as the night embraced the city, the foundation they had built together stood as a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that no matter how dark the past may have been, a brighter future was always within reach. Their journey had only just begun. Years passed, and the legacy of Nathaniel and Grace Harrington lived on, far beyond the walls of the Grand Mansion and the confines of the Harrington Foundation. What had begun as a fight for survival against manipulation and power had blossomed into a movement, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love and compassion. The mansion, once a symbol of greed and control, had become a vibrant space of community, where people from all walks of life gathered for support, healing, and growth. The foundation's reach expanded across the country, with new chapters opening in cities far and wide. People who had once been homeless, forgotten, and discarded were now given the tools and the hope they needed to rebuild their lives. New families thrived in the affordable housing that the foundation had created, and schools funded by the Harrington Foundation had given thousands of children the opportunity to break free from the cycles of poverty. Nathaniel and Grace's children, now growing up with an understanding of what true wealth meant, compassion, integrity, and a desire to leave the world better than they found it, were continuing their parents' work, each in their own way. Their story had inspired not only their own generation, but countless others who had been touched by the foundation's outreach. But perhaps the most powerful testament to their journey was not found in the grand projects or the recognition they received. It was in the quiet moments. When Nathaniel and Grace sat together at the window of their home, watching the city below, knowing that their work had made a real difference in the lives of so many. One evening, as they sat together, the weight of years of work, struggle, and triumph settled gently between them. Their love had grown deeper than either of them had ever thought possible, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. They had created a life together that was built not on wealth, but on the simple yet profound values that had guided them through the darkest times. With their hands intertwined, they knew that their journey wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone who had been touched by their story. Those who had found hope where there had once been none. Those whose lives had been changed by a single act of kindness. And those who had come to believe that even the most broken among them could rise again. And so, as the sun set on another day, Nathaniel and Grace looked out over the world they had helped shape, their hearts full of pride and gratitude. Their work was far from finished, but they knew one thing for certain. They had built something that would endure for generations to come. For in the end, it was not the wealth they had reclaimed or the power they had fought for that mattered. It was the lives they had touched, the love they had shared, and the legacy of hope and change they had created together. And as long as their story was told, their vision would live on. Nathaniel squeezed Grace's hand, and with a smile that spoke of everything they had overcome, he whispered, "We did it." And in that moment, they both knew this was just the beginning. Thank you so much for taking the time to follow this story and watch the video from start to finish. We hope it brought you moments of enjoyment, emotion, and valuable lessons about love, resilience, and the power of kindness. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on future exciting stories. Your small actions will help us continue creating engaging and meaningful content for you. Thank you once again for your support and for watching. We wish you a wonderful day and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Video disclaimer. This video is for entertainment purposes only and is not related to any real events or individuals. All characters and events in the story are purely fictional.